Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we descend into the shadowy, flickering world of ancient haircuts, a time before mirrors had handles and shampoo was still just a river. We're talking about the Stone Age, where your neighbourhood barber might have been the same guy who cracked open mammoth bones and grunted a lot. And here's your cheeky warning. They probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. I'm nosy like that. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's about 10,000 years ago. The world smells like wet moss, pine sap, and a dash of mammoth dung. A man squats near a campfire clutching a jagged flint shard in one hand and a matted chunk of his own hair in the other. He's not grooming for glamour. He's trying to keep lice from colonising his scalp like it's a newly discovered continent. This is pre-everything. No scissors, no razors, no combs unless you count bone forks that double as lice scrapers. Early humans quickly realised that less hair meant fewer parasites and less weight dragging on their sweaty skulls. And thus the prehistoric haircut is born, not in salons, but in survival. Hair was removed with tools so crude they make kindergarten safety scissors look like surgical equipment. Sharpened obsidian, flint, even seashells were used to either saw through hair or yank it out entirely. Picture a friend scraping your scalp with a jagged rock while grunting encouragement. Romantic, right? Archaeologists have unearthed flint blades with wear patterns suggesting they were used for slicing through keratin, your hair's main ingredient. And based on preserved mummies like Ötzi the Iceman, who sports a neatly trimmed beard and hair even in death, we know grooming mattered. Possibly for status, possibly for hygiene, or maybe just to avoid looking like a walking tumbleweed. Interestingly, even in these early societies, certain hairstyles may have denoted tribal identity or rank. Though no selfies survive, burial findings show that some individuals had carefully arranged hair, even in the grave. Historians still argue whether these styles were for ritual, vanity, or just a pre-battle flex, because nothing says, I'm about to crush your ribcage like an intimidating bowl cut. Children, elders, and warriors alike likely had their hair cut around communal fires. Picture it. Under a violet twilight sky, someone's cousin is scraping a teen's head bald while others roast tubers. Hair isn't just hair here, it's symbolic, possibly mystical. Some tribes believed that hair was linked to strength or spiritual essence. Cutting it could mean mourning, purification, or preparation for something dangerous. Let's not forget fire itself, a tool, a danger, and a reluctant hairstylist. In moments of desperation or ceremony, people might singe off hair. This method is as painful as it sounds and smells like burnt goat. Definitely not endorsed by dermatologists. And of course, no early haircut story is complete without the accidental barber. This is the guy who tripped on a root and woke up missing a chunk of his beard thanks to a curious toddler and a shard of slate. There are probably cave paintings of him somewhere, captioned with ancient equivalents of before and after. But it wasn't all grunts and flint. As societies formed, so did roles, like the proto-barber. This person likely served as a healer, a midwife, and a haircut aficionado all in one. They may have even chanted or used herbs while trimming, turning grooming into ritual. Who knew the Stone Age salon came with a soundtrack and aromatherapy? Meanwhile, the idea of mirror was a polished river rock. Men and women alike leaned over reflective pools to check their hairline, unless it was frozen, which meant guessing. Spoiler. Not always a great idea. One poorly judged snip and you're stuck with prehistoric bangs for a month. And yet, through all this chaos, there was care. People washed their hair with sand, ashes, and herbs like rosemary and thyme. These ancient conditioners helped untangle and even repel pests. It's like nature's own shampoo bar with added grit. In colder regions, hair was sometimes grown out for insulation, but once spring arrived, off it went. Cut with what? A jawbone if you were desperate. The Inuit, for example, used sharp bone tools not just for hunting seals, but for keeping sideburns tidy. Dual-purpose efficiency at its finest. One particularly charming theory among fringe scholars is that certain cave drawings may actually be prehistoric hair tutorials. You've seen the stick figures. Maybe that spiral isn't a hunting map, but an epic depiction of the first man bun. Okay. Historians still argue whether this interpretation holds water or just wishful thinking. Let's also not ignore the animal connection. Dogs, wolves, Even early domesticated goats might have licked hair into shape, or worse, chewed it. Some nomadic groups likely believed animals had spirits that could cleanse human companions. So your weird dog grooming you while you sleep? In ancient times, that was possibly spiritual dry shampoo. And then there's the ceremonial angle. Before hunts, warriors might cut hair into intimidating styles. Mohawks made with tree sap, spikes hardened with mud. Add a dash of red ochre and boom, prehistoric runway ready. These weren't just styles, but war paint for the scalp. Hair was also stored. Yes, stored. Some archaeologists found bundles of hair buried with bodies, perhaps as keepsakes or offerings. Was it grandma's lock or a warrior's lucky charm? We can only guess. But clearly hair held meaning even when detached. You're probably wondering, did anyone ever go full bald on purpose? Maybe. Some skulls show shaving patterns, which means yes, someone voluntarily scrapped it all off, possibly due to disease, grief, or just to feel the wind on their dome for once. In fact, in some regions, baldness was seen as divine. The less hair you had, the closer to the gods you were. Ironically, this belief predates both religion and Rogaine. Now, imagine that same man by the fire again. He finishes his ritual haircut. His scalp is red and stinging. He smiles, or grimaces, it's hard to tell. Around him, others nod. The lice are gone. His spirit perhaps feels lighter, and somewhere, a future historian wonders if he was just prepping for date night. From caves to sacred stones, these early haircuts weren't about style. They were about survival, symbolism, and sometimes surrender. Hair was personal and public, sacred and silly. And that blend of practical and profound, that's a thread we'll follow through every civilization to come. So next time you complain about your stylist being 5 minutes late, remember, at least they're not coming at your bangs with a chipped oyster shell. The flickering firelight fades, and we shift thousands of years forward to the hot, humming sands of ancient Egypt, a place where the Nile snakes through golden dust and haircuts are less about comfort and more about cosmic alignment and cleanliness. This isn't your average barbershop. Here, grooming is practically a sacred rite, and if you're not careful, your barber might also be a high priest. Egyptians take their appearance seriously, like gold leaf eyeshadow and daily oil massage seriously. The elite, pharaohs, priests and wealthy traders strut around with polished bald heads, precisely shaped wigs, and beards that sometimes aren't even real. That's right, some of those perfectly manicured chin strands were false, braided masterpieces tied on with ribbons. Fashion forward or fake? Historians still argue whether these faux beards were daily wear or reserved for divine cosplay. Barbers, though, those were important people. Not just snippers and shavers, they were keepers of health and hygiene. In a land where heat turned your scalp into a sweat lodge, a clean-shaven head wasn't just stylish, it was survival. Lice, fleas, and the ever-present Egyptian sun made full hairdos a hazard. So, out came the bronze razors, curved, wicked little tools with a shine like the sun god Re himself. And let's pause there. Bronze razors. These weren't rusting chunks of metal. Egyptian metallurgy was top tier. The blades were carefully crafted, often stored in ornate cases, and sharpened with stone before every trim. Some archaeologists even believe barber kits were buried with the dead, not for ghostly grooming, but because hair was tied to the soul's purity. No one wants a bad hair day in the afterlife. The barber's role was so essential that they had hieroglyphs for them, and yes, it involved squatting. Picture this. A man seated on a low stool in a courtyard, client perched on another, the barber rhythmically scraping away under the palm tree shade. No capes, no clippers, just a bowl of water, a blade, and steady hands. You moved, you bled. Not a lot, but enough to remember next time to keep still. Priests were particularly picky. Before entering temples, they had to be completely hairless, from head to toe. They'd shave daily, sometimes multiple times, using not just razors but depilatory creams made from crushed lime, animal fat, and who knows what else. One papyrus recipe reads more like a chemistry experiment than a beauty treatment. Think of it as an ancient spa day, with a side of skin irritation. Women too got in on the grooming game. Elite women kept their heads shaved beneath elaborate wigs of human hair, plant fibres, or even wool. These weren't your Party City specials. They were luxuriously scented with frankincense and myrrh. styled with beeswax and often adorned with gold beads or lapis lazuli. Real hair was high maintenance, so wigs were both fashion and function. Plus, they kept the lice guessing. Of course, not everyone could afford such opulence. Commoners might use stone blades or burn hair off with coals. Yes, really. Smelled like burnt toast and bad decisions. They'd make do with wooden combs and clay bowls of water, sometimes adding natron, a salty cleaning agent that doubled as a deodorant and mild bleach. So if someone's scalp looked suspiciously shiny, it wasn't just fashion, it was possibly a chemical accident. The social layer to all this was thick as honey. If you were someone, you had a personal barber. They came to your home, usually at sunrise, before the desert heat turned blades into branding irons. If you were no one, you went to the public square and hoped the line wasn't too long or the razor too dull. And while today's barbershop might be a place for sports debates, Egyptian barbers were gossip central. "Did you hear about Kemney's affair with the linen merchant?" they'd whisper, snipping away. For many, this was the only time they heard news beyond their own narrow lives. A haircut was practically a newsletter, just with a lot more side-eye. Even in death, hair mattered. Tomb paintings show scenes of hairstyling, shaving and perfuming, almost like an ancient Instagram feed of #glowup. And some mummies? Still styled. That's commitment. One of the more curious fringe theories among scholars is that certain ancient wigs had secret pockets, mini compartments for herbs or charms woven into the locks. Whether this was for fragrance or magical protection is unclear, but if true, it makes those wigs the earliest fanny packs in history. And speaking of sacred heads, let's not forget the pharaohs. Their Nemes headcloths covered clean-shaven scalps, sometimes protecting golden ceremonial wigs reserved only for religious rites. Those pharaonic false beards, curled at the ends to signify divinity. A straight beard meant you were royal. A curved one, boom, you're a god. Interestingly, children's hair was also a matter of tradition. Most boys had their heads shaved except for one side lock, known as the lock of youth, until puberty. It looked like a rat tail with delusions of grandeur. Girls wore braids and often added amulets for protection, charm, or just to say, "I'm 6 and I'm fabulous." Even more intriguing, the connection between barbers and medicine. Egyptian barbers often acted as early surgeons. Minor wounds, boils, tooth pulled. That's right, call your barber. Some texts suggest barbers had rituals for bloodletting or purging, connecting the purification of the body to that of the spirit. So in one appointment you could get a fade, a facial, and a good old-fashioned bloodletting. 3 stars on Yelp. Great shave, weird vibe. Historians still debate whether certain barber tools were shared communally or held by religious orders. Some tombs contain full barber kits with copper mirrors, bone combs, and even perfume cones. Those waxy incense blobs Egyptians wore on their heads that slowly melted throughout the day. Haircut and aromatherapy in one, they were ahead of their time. We can't close this Egyptian chapter without mentioning the elite tomb of Ka, a royal architect, where a full grooming kit was found, including razors and tweezers, all neatly packed in a wooden box. This wasn't casual, it was curated. Imagine a barber box passed down like a family heirloom, its every nick and scratch a story. So, as the sun sets over the pyramids and temple walls glow orange, our Egyptian barber wipes his bronze blade on a linen cloth, gestures for the next customer, and continues the sacred art of shaping identity, status and style with each careful snip. Because in ancient Egypt, hair wasn't just vanity, it was identity, it was magic, and sometimes it was the difference between a noble and a nobody. The Nile's golden gleam fades, and now we drift eastward, into the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamia, the so-called cradle of civilization, where kings build ziggurats and scribes invent writing. But tonight, we're interested in another mark of their legacy, the divine art of the haircut. It's early morning in ancient Babylon. The sun peeks over mud-brick rooftops, and somewhere near the marketplace a man reclines on a low stool. Beside him, a figure approaches with steady hands and a kit of copper tools. But this isn't just a trim, it's a performance, a blessing, maybe even a medical procedure. In Mesopotamia, the barber's role is wildly complex. He's a stylist, a healer, and, depending on who you ask, a low-tier magician. Unlike the shaved skulls of Egyptian elites, Mesopotamians love their locks. Men wear long beards and shoulder-length hair, often intricately curled or braided. It's not just a style, it's a statement. Your hair reveals your class, your city, even your mood. Priests often shave their heads, but most men, they treat their hair like a sculptural project. Barbershops, if we can even call them that, are gathering spots, often on the open streets or tucked between market stalls. The tools are bronze or copper, honed sharp and stored in leather pouches. Alongside shears and razors, you'll find tweezers, combs, and pumice stones. Yes, a proper haircut might also include exfoliation. Skin and scalp were considered linked to one's health and energy, so if your barber throws in a quick elbow rub, that's Mesopotamian service. The real stars, though, are the beards. These aren't just facial fuzz, they're masterpieces. Waxed, curled, oiled, and sometimes dyed, Babylonian beards are status symbols. Kings have stylists to curl their beards into elaborate ringlets. High officials wear multiple tiers of curls, like a woolly waterfall of influence. And if you think that's extra, remember, this was before blow dryers. To keep those curls pristine, men use a mix of oil and resin, sometimes even scented with cedarwood or myrrh. One recovered clay tablet details a beard balm recipe that includes sheep fat, date oil, and powdered lapis lazuli. It's unclear if it worked, but it definitely smelled intense. Women, meanwhile, often wear their hair long and tied back or braided, sometimes wrapped in linen bands or capped with delicate circlets of metal. Some styles involve parting the hair in 4 quadrants and twisting them into elaborate knots. Imagine waking up every day and trying to replicate that without a mirror. And no, you couldn't call a stylist. You had your sister, your aunt, and a lot of guesswork. What's fascinating is the religious connection. Many barbers also serve temple roles. The line between grooming and ritual is thin. Before entering temples, certain worshippers had to be ritually shaved. Heads, beards, even chest hair. It wasn't about cleanliness alone. Hair was seen as a spiritual antenna, and removing it symbolized humility or transformation. Historians still argue whether this practice originated in Sumer or Akkad, but it's clear that hair held divine associations. Some barbers were trained in healing as well. In the famous Code of Hammurabi, one of the world's oldest law codes, there are references to barbers who also practice minor surgery. You might go in for a beard trim and come out with a drained abscess. Multitasking at its most intimate. There's even evidence that barbers acted as early exorcists. If a person was thought to be cursed or afflicted by spirits, a barber might be summoned to shave the head, apply salves, and chant protective incantations. That's right, barbering as battlefield medicine for your soul. Fringe theory? Maybe. But multiple cuneiform tablets reference this ritual cleansing by cutting. Barber schools per se didn't exist, but knowledge was passed orally and through apprenticeships. A young man might spend years learning to hold a blade steady, master the layering of curls, and memorize prayers to accompany certain cuts. Yes, even a fade could have its own incantation. Let's talk about the tools again. Some razors were shaped like miniature sickles. Others resembled folding knives. Bronze shears often had ornate handles, decorated with animal heads or divine motifs. In one museum, a barber's comb carved with a lion's face still shows traces of oil. That's a comb that meant business. And mirrors, still rare, still small, still mostly polished metal. Clients often had to trust the barber entirely, or squint into a basin of water if they wanted to peek mid-cut. You think you've had a bad haircut? Try getting bangs by guesswork. For royalty, grooming was even more elaborate. Kings and queens had personal stylists who doubled as confidants. One Assyrian tablet describes a royal barber being promoted after saving a queen's hair from an infestation of small jumping beetles. Hero status. Barbering also shows up in art. Stone reliefs show stylists carefully working on nobles, their clients serene, eyes half closed. Perhaps the Mesopotamian barbershop was an early version of today's spa, a place to unwind, detox, and talk politics. Speaking of politics, barbers often overheard secrets. While trimming a merchant's curls or a priest's beard, they'd catch whispers of market shifts, betrayals, or love affairs. Some believe barbers acted as informal informants, selling gossip to temple scribes or city guards. Fringe theory? Absolutely. But in a world without text messages, who else knew everybody's business? And sometimes barbers faced danger. A botched haircut wasn't just embarrassing, it could be blasphemous. Certain priesthoods required exacting standards. Trim too much off a sacred sidelock and you might find yourself exiled. Or worse. Historians still debate a clay tablet that tells of a blade-armed priest cast from Ishtar's temple for shearing too short. Drama, ancient style. Now, let's zoom out. Across Mesopotamia, from the city of Ur to Nineveh, hair signalled more than fashion. It was tied to fertility, loyalty, and even legal status. Slaves often had shaved heads. Freedmen let their hair grow as a mark of liberation. A rebellious teen growing out his sideburns. Classic trope even then. And here's a quirky twist. In some rituals, cut hair was burned as an offering to the gods. The smoke, it was believed, carried prayers upward. So if your scalp sizzled mid-trim, it might have just been part of a divine voicemail system. One particularly intriguing fringe notion is that ziggurat priests tracked astrology with haircut calendars, scheduling trims based on lunar phases or planetary alignments. Did Mercury in retrograde mean a bad time for bangs? Historians still argue, but wouldn't that explain a lot? Finally, let's imagine again that early morning in Babylon. The barber rinses his blade in a ceramic bowl, wipes it clean, and beckons his next customer forward. The sun rises higher, casting warm light on a crowd of men waiting to maintain their curls, their pride, and perhaps their connection to the divine. In this world, a haircut isn't just grooming. It's ritual, it's medicine, it's status. And like every ancient mystery, it's a little bit magic. From Babylon's scented curls and incantation-laced trims, we drift westward again, landing in the city-states of ancient Greece. It's about 450 BCE in Athens, and the agora, the bustling public square, is already alive with a clatter of sandals, the scent of olives, and the sound of philosophical debates. But around one shaded corner, another kind of conversation hums. No epic poems or Socratic dialogues here, just the lively chatter of gossip, politics, and laughter swirling through the ancient barbershop. And yes, there were barbershops. They're called kureya, and they're not tucked away in private homes. They're public, open, and crucial to the social life of any respectable man. These aren't places where you just get a haircut and bolt. You stay, you talk, you lean into debates over democracy and discus throws, while a skilled kuros, or barber, snips at your curls. Greek barbers are craftsmen. Their tools: iron razors, bronze shears, combs carved from boxwood or ivory, and bowls of water sometimes laced with herbs. They also carry a strop, essential for keeping blades sharp. A dull razor means pain, and pain means losing customers. Not great for business in a city where competition thrives harder than the olive trees. Men in Athens favour carefully curled hair, oiled to gleam under the Mediterranean sun. Beards? Absolutely. A well-groomed beard is the Greek equivalent of a verified blue checkmark. Long, shaped, and often divided into elegant forks. You'd better believe there are arguments over the best beard oil recipe. One popular blend includes olive oil, crushed coriander seeds, and a dash of honey. Basically a salad dressing for your face. And speaking of oils, barbers aren't just barbers, they're masseurs, exfoliators, even amateur therapists. A typical session might involve a beard trim, a hair combing, an oil massage to the scalp and shoulders, and a liberal application of gossip. The man next to you might be a philosopher, a merchant, or someone with 7 unpaid debts and 3 side relationships. Ancient barbershops are part hair care, part courtroom, part reality TV. Greek boys get their first haircuts around age 7, often during a ceremony known as the kouraion. It's not just snipping, it's a rite of passage. The hair is offered to the gods, usually Apollo, and symbolically marks the child's step toward adulthood. Historians still argue whether the style of the cut had deeper meanings or was simply mom's choice. Of course, hair trends vary wildly over time. In Homeric Greece, men wear their hair long, tied back like warriors. By the time of Pericles, shorter cuts become fashionable, more refined, more intellectual. Spartans predictably keep it minimal. Short hair, minimal fuss, less to grab in battle. Because let's be honest, nothing kills a battlefield vibe like getting yanked by your ponytail. And yes, Spartan warriors famously comb their hair before battle. Not vanity, ritual. Preparing one's body included preparing one's appearance. A neat braid meant discipline. A clean beard meant control. Plus, you never know when a dramatist will immortalise your battle look in a tragedy. Greek women, meanwhile, wear their hair long, often tied up in buns or woven into elaborate braids. Married women typically keep it more restrained. Maidens and priestesses wear it looser. Hairpins, sometimes of silver, bronze or bone, double as tools and, if needed, self-defense items. Try stabbing someone with a scrunchie. One quirky tidbit from Athenian life. Barbers are sometimes fined for spreading false gossip. That's right. Fake news in the barbershop, punishable by law. Of course, proving it was another matter. Still, this rule hints at how central the Chorea is to the civic rhythm. It's the town square within the town square. Let's not forget the philosophers. Socrates, Plato, and even Aristotle likely spent time in these shops, not just for grooming, but for people watching. Philosophers often use the barbershop as a microcosm for society. If you want to know how a city thinks, watch how its men talk while getting shaved. And the barbers themselves. They're middle-class citizens, sometimes former slaves or freedmen who trained into the profession. The good ones are respected, even beloved. A popular barber might have a waiting list. A bad one? Let's just say there are Athenian comedy plays where a botched haircut is the punchline. Hair disasters. Still funny after 2,000 years. Not all barbershops are equal, though. The upscale ones, especially in richer districts, offer better tools, scented oils and softer seating. Think of it as the difference between a roadside shack and a spa with marble columns and complimentary figs. But no matter where you go, there's always the risk of a barber philosopher. A guy who cuts your hair but won't stop lecturing on ethics. Fringe scholars argue that barbers were sometimes informal teachers, especially for young men still shaping their worldview. Some claim this is where rhetorical techniques were sharpened, alongside shears. Oh, and styles change. During the Hellenistic period, post-Alexander, men start adopting shorter, Macedonian-inspired cuts. Less curl, more practicality. Still oiled, of course. Heaven forbid you step out with a dry scalp. Hair could also signify grief or mourning. In times of loss, men might shave their heads entirely or cut their beards short. Women would let their hair fall loose as a public sign of sorrow. One tragedy even describes a mother tearing her braid out in despair. Symbolism ran deep, from roots to tips. In Greek athletic life, hair is another story. Olympic athletes often shave or closely trim their bodies, sometimes using scrapers called strigils after applying oil. It's part aesthetic, part performance, part I'm faster because I'm smoother. Again, don't knock it. Speed swimming still shaves for a reason. Now, imagine a day in the life. You, a young Athenian, stroll into the Chorea. The barber greets you with a nod. You sit. He drapes a linen cloth, sharpens his blade on a leather strop. Around you, men argue over which tragedian deserves the most wreaths. One man quotes Euripides, another talks about his cousin's lost goat. You laugh, sip watered wine, and leave the shop looking better, feeling smarter, and knowing 4 new rumours that may or may not be true. And remember that bearded man in the corner? He's still debating whether virtue can be taught. Meanwhile, your barber just gave you the cleanest lineup in Athens. In ancient Greece, hair is more than hair. It's politics. It's performance. It's philosophy. And sometimes, it's the most honest thing in the room. The Mediterranean breeze carries us from the olive-scented courtyards of Athens to the marble-clad avenues of Rome, where hairstyles are as regulated as togas, and your barber might know your social status better than your best friend. Welcome to the world of Roman clippers and class codes, a place where every strand snipped carries political weight, and a single lock left out of place might cost you your dignity. Let's set the scene. The forum buzzes, sandals slap against sun-warmed stone, and shop fronts spill over with linen, olives and debate. Among these bustling stalls, nestled between a bathhouse and a bakery, is a tonstrina, a Roman barbershop. Unlike the lively Greek Chorea, the Roman shop feels more structured, almost militaristic. Appointments matter, hierarchy matters, and yes, your haircut might be governed by law. Roman men are expected to keep their hair short and tidy. No flowing curls here unless you're actively trying to look like a Greek philosopher or rebel. The buzzword is disciplina, discipline, and Roman barbers, or tonsors, enforce it with clippers sharper than Caesar's politics. These tonsors operate early in the day, especially before public events. A well-groomed head is a badge of respectability. Show up to the Senate with a dishevelled beard, and you risk not just mockery, but suspicion. After all, wild hair often implies wild thoughts, and the Roman Republic doesn't love a rebel, unless you're writing epic poetry, in which case grow that beard and brood dramatically. Barbershops aren't just grooming parlours, they're social stages. As in Greece, Roman men gather here to swap gossip, debate politics, and eavesdrop like it's a sport. Except here, there's more at stake. Rumours overheard in the Tonstrina could end up in court or on a senator's desk. Fringe historians even suggest that some barbers were paid informants. Nice trim, Gaius. And by the way, did you hear about that seditious poem being passed around the baths? Let's talk tools. Roman tonsors use iron razors, bronze shears, and pumice stones. The razors are straight and unforgiving, requiring steady hands and zero distractions. Combs are made from bone or wood, and a bowl of warm water is always nearby for rinsing. After the shave, perfumed oils are applied, often infused with bay leaf, rosemary or myrtle. Not just for scent, but for showing off your wealth. Smelling like a spice rack was the ancient equivalent of new cologne, hudis. Hair held such value in Roman society that young boys had ceremonial first haircuts known as tutulus ceremonies, often linked to coming-of-age rites. The cut hair would be offered to the household gods, the lares, and kept in a small box as a family relic. Sweet or creepy? Historians still argue, though some fringe theories suggest these locks could be used in future healing rituals or even to influence fate. Hairstyles weren't one-size-fits-all. Senators preferred conservative cuts, short, squared, nothing flashy. The capillates was a term used to mock long-haired men, often associated with Eastern decadence or philosophical idleness. But during the Empire, especially under emperors like Hadrian, beards made a brief comeback. Why? Some say Hadrian liked hiding his acne. Others say it was a nod to Greek intellectualism. Either way, trends had imperial impact. And what of the women? Roman women's hair is a whole other empire. Elaborate styles tower with braids, pins, and curls, sometimes sculpted into literal architecture. Wealthy women employ ornatrices, personal hairdressers, who work for hours to craft hairstyles worthy of marble busts. The tutulas and nodus and senicrines styles aren't just names, they're social declarations. The ornatrix, often a skilled slave, uses heated bronze rods. Yes, curling irons existed, beeswax for hold, and sometimes even wire scaffolding beneath the hair to maintain height. A high-do means high status, and if it took 4 hours and 5 servants to complete, even better. It wasn't just about fashion, it was Roman one-up womanship. There's also the matter of colour. Romans adore blonde hair, associating it with Germanic tribes and exotic beauty. Some women wear wigs made from the hair of enslaved captives, especially blondes from Gaul. Others bleach their hair with pigeon droppings and wood ash, a mix that works just well enough to justify the stink. Historians still debate whether this practice was widespread or exaggerated by satirical poets who loved poking fun at vanity. Wigs, or capillamentum, are prized possessions stored in boxes of ivory or cedar. They're status symbols and practical time savers. One story tells of a noblewoman caught during a fire yelling not for her children, but her wig. Priorities. But let's return to the barbershop. Here you might encounter the scalp massage guy. Yes, that's a thing. After a trim, some barbers offer a vigorous head rub using olive oil and finely crushed herbs. It's relaxing, yes, but it also stimulates hair growth, at least according to Pliny the Elder, Rome's favourite encyclopedist of everything possibly dubious. Sometimes things get a little bloody. Romans practice hair plucking and full-body grooming, especially among athletes and young aristocrats. That means tweezers, pumice stones, and, in extreme cases, depilatory creams with ingredients like bat blood and fermented goat urine. Yes, that's a real recipe. And no, don't try this at home, or anywhere. Interestingly, barbers are also involved in mourning rituals. Upon death, family members might shave their heads or cut their hair short. This visual display of grief isn't just symbolic, it's socially required. Failing to do so can be seen as disrespectful to the dead. Some widows keep locks of their husband's hair in small urns or pendants, which is both touching and a little Victorian Gothic before it was cool. Public shaming also uses the haircut. Criminals and disgraced citizens may be shaved as punishment, exposing their scalps to the public eye. In a culture where your hair literally crowns your dignity, losing it is a humiliation worse than a toga slip at a Senate meeting. But as with all things Roman, the rules shift with the times. By the late Empire, with its embrace of Eastern traditions, longer hairstyles for men return. Philosophers and mystics sport flowing locks. Emperors like Marcus Aurelius wear full beards to suggest wisdom and gravitas, And the barbers, they adapt, just like they always have, offering longer cuts, beard trims, and even poetic sympathy for customers dealing with thinning hair. Roman toupee, anyone? Let's not forget the political metaphor. Cicero once referred to trimming the state's beard in a speech about purging corruption. Hair wasn't just style, it was symbolism, woven into the rhetoric of power. And finally, picture it. The tonstrina is closing. A young boy clutches the lock of hair he'll offer to the gods tomorrow. A senator adjusts his toga in the mirror, admiring the perfect part in his salt and pepper curls. The barber wipes down his tools, places them in a box carved with vines and laurel, and sighs. Another day of shaping not just appearances, but the very face of Roman identity. Because in Rome, every snip is political, every strand holds meaning, and in a world where image is everything, your haircut might just be your history. The chatter of Latin syllables fades, swept away on a breeze that carries us far to the east, into a land where rivers run like ink strokes through scrolls of mountains. Now we step into ancient China, where hair is more than a personal feature. It's a filial obligation, a cosmic map, and sometimes a symbol of both protest and harmony. In dynastic China, getting a haircut isn't a matter of vanity, it's philosophy in motion. We open on a misty morning during the Tang dynasty, a golden age of poetry and progress. Inside a humble courtyard, a boy kneels while his grandmother combs his long dark hair with quiet reverence. There is no rush, no idle chatter, only the methodical sound of wooden comb teeth parting silken strands. In China, this act is ceremonial. The body, including hair, is a sacred gift from one's parents. To alter it carelessly, deeply disrespectful. Shen ti fa fu, shou ji fu mu, says Confucius. The body, hair, and skin are received from our parents. To not preserve them is unfilial. Thus, for much of Chinese history, cutting one's hair is rare, even radical. Young men and women allow their hair to grow long, kept clean, tied up, and maintained with elaborate care. Styles vary by dynasty, region, and social class, but the respect for the uncut strand remains nearly constant, until politics decides otherwise. Take, for example, the top knot, popular among Han men. Hair is grown long and wound atop the head, often fastened with jade or carved wood pins. Women wear theirs in buns, twists, or waterfalls down their back, sometimes adorned with flowers or gold. Hairstyles aren't fashion, they're status statements, aligned with Taoist and Confucian ideals of balance, purity, and respect. Now imagine the surprise, no, the existential whiplash, when the Qing dynasty rolls in with a brand new policy: shave the front of your head and braid the rest into a queue or bianzi. Suddenly a full haircut isn't just permitted, it's required. Refuse? That's treason. The slogan was brutal: keep your hair and lose your head, or cut your hair and keep it. This decree wasn't about style, it was about submission. The Manchu rulers, seeking to solidify control over Han subjects, made the haircut a political tool. Overnight, barbers became instruments of empire and hair transformed into a battlefield. Imagine being a Confucian scholar whose every strand was sacred, forced to visit a state-sanctioned barber to have his identity clipped away. For many it felt like a second death. Some chose rebellion or exile over compliance. Historians still argue whether the queue policy was the most successful psychological manipulation of its time, or simply a brutal misunderstanding of cultural symbolism. Barbers themselves varied by era and social context. In early dynasties, grooming was largely a domestic duty. Mothers combed daughters, fathers groomed sons. But by the Song and Ming periods, professional barbers emerged, setting up small shops along bustling streets or carrying portable kits to clients' homes. Their tools, iron or bronze scissors, tortoise-shell combs, and sometimes even moon-shaped razors for temple shaves. Yes, temple shaves. Buddhist monks take vows that include head shaving as a symbol of renunciation. The ceremony is called jietu, literally cutting hair. Performed by senior monks with soft chants and incense, it's less about grooming and more about dissolving the ego. Some monks keep it tidy with regular shaves, while others let patches grow in as a show of indifference to vanity. Either way, their bald heads gleam like philosophical beacons. Meanwhile, Taoist priests often maintain long hair, tied into high buns, reflecting their belief in preserving the natural state of the body. Two traditions, two styles, both spiritual, both symbolic. Women's hairstyles are even more encoded. A single hairpin could indicate marital status. An updo with twin loops might mean widowhood. A braid down the back, youth. Some fringe scholars suggest there was an entire hair language used discreetly between women, sort of an early non-verbal text message system involving buns, combs and parting angles. Could be legend. Could be genius. Hair care was also medicinal. Traditional Chinese medicine viewed hair health as a reflection of internal balance, especially kidney and blood health. Tonics made from black sesame seeds, goji berries, and Polygonum multiflorum, that's Hisho Wu to friends, were consumed to maintain glossy locks. One record describes an emperor who bathed his hair in deer milk and silk extract. Effective? Debatable? Luxurious? Extremely. And then there were the superstitions. Cut your hair on the first day of the Lunar New Year? Bad luck. Cut it in the 7th month near the Ghost Festival? Even worse, it might attract wandering spirits. Barbers often shut down during these periods, citing cultural wisdom as a better excuse than admitting they didn't want ghost customers. Hair rituals also surrounded major life events. Brides had their hair combed in a specific pattern, usually 4 strokes symbolising one life, 2 hearts, harmony and old age together. This shufu ritual was often conducted by a female elder who whispered blessings with each pass of the comb. Weddings, funerals, births, all had associated hairstyles or grooming rituals. Even exams had hair traditions. Students braided red cords into their hair for good luck before imperial civil service tests, because nothing says I'm ready for bureaucracy like a lucky ponytail. Let's talk tools. Scissors were single pivot and incredibly sharp. Some were shaped like birds or dragons, both artistic and ergonomic. Mirrors, polished bronze or, for the wealthy, obsidian-backed glass. And then there were the portable barber kits. A wooden box with a stool, a comb holder, a razor sleeve, and a small brazier to heat the blades. Pop-up salons, 1,000 years ahead of schedule. Hair salons, yes they existed, were usually run by women for women in major cities. These spaces became gossip hubs, matchmaking centres, and beauty workshops. Wigs made from human hair or silk were common among courtesans and performers. Some styles were so elaborate they required scaffolding and assistance to support the weight. Not ideal in a typhoon. One quirky fact: ancient Chinese soldiers often wore their hair coiled under helmets, believing that cutting it before battle would dishonour their ancestors. However, prisoners of war were often shaved to signal defeat. Hair as both honour and humiliation, it depended on who held the scissors. So imagine a day in late Ming era Beijing. The sun rises over the hutongs. The alleys fill with the scent of rice porridge and tea. A barber walks the streets with his kit slung over his shoulder, calling softly, "Cut hair, shave face, trim beard." He pauses under a banyan tree where a merchant waits. With practised hands he sets his stool, sharpens his blade and begins, not just a trim, but a tradition. One that has survived emperors, philosophers, revolutions and ghosts. Because in ancient China, every haircut is more than grooming. It's a ritual, a philosophy, a delicate balance of yin and yang, scissors and soul. The scent of sandalwood and smoke curls into the air as we drift from the serene courtyards of China into the vibrant, bustling tapestry of ancient India, a land where rivers sing sacred songs, temples rise like mountains, and the barbershop, of all places, straddles the line between divine and daily life. In India, hair isn't just grown or cut, it's offered, judged, ritualized, and sometimes renounced altogether. Let's begin in Varanasi, the city of light, where pilgrims bathe in the Ganges at sunrise, and the first thing many of them do after a prayer and a plunge is visit a barber. Not for a stylish crop or a quick buzz. No, they're here for the tonsure. This sacred head-shaving ritual is one of surrender, a symbolic act of letting go, of ego, karma, even grief. In India, particularly within Hindu tradition, the act of shaving one's head is deeply spiritual. It's not a style, it's a sacrifice. People offer their hair to gods at temples like Tirumala or Rameswaram, sometimes in gratitude, other times in mourning. The most famous of these is the Tirupati temple, where daily thousands of pilgrims donate their hair. It's said that Lord Venkateswara, to whom the temple is dedicated, accepts these offerings with silent blessings. And no, The hair doesn't go to waste, it's collected, cleaned, and, in a twist only globalization could write, exported for wig-making worldwide. The barbers who perform these tonsures are not mere stylists. They are temple servants, sometimes third or fourth generation hereditary barbers, trained not only in shaving techniques, but also in the accompanying rituals and chants. With straight razors and practiced hands, they shave heads clean, often while standing ankle-deep in the holy river, or seated beside temple walls worn smooth by centuries of prayer. Outside temple towns, hair continues to play a central role in daily and spiritual life. In ancient Vedic culture, the mundan, or first haircut of a child, is a significant rite of passage. It typically occurs around a child's first or third year, and is often accompanied by a small ceremony involving fire offerings, mantras, and extended family members wielding flower garlands and smartphones. Well, in modern versions. In the ancient world, it was deeply symbolic, a purging of past life impurities and an entry into this life's proper karma. For boys, especially those of Brahmin families, another pivotal moment is the Upanayana ceremony, a sacred thread ritual signifying the start of formal education and spiritual awareness. A partial head shave, leaving a small tuft or shikha at the crown, is performed. This tuft isn't random. It's said to retain spiritual energy and focus, a sort of metaphysical antenna for the universe's vibrations. Historians still debate whether this originated purely as a religious symbol or had roots in ancient energy medicine. And yes, in many classical Indian texts, hair is a motif of power and identity. Take the epic Mahabharata, where Draupadi's loose, unwashed hair becomes a symbol of her vow for justice, or Shiva, the dreadlocked god whose matted hair is said to hold the Ganges itself. Even sages and rishis were known for their jata, long coiled hair that symbolised asceticism and control over primal forces. So basically, if your locks were impressive enough, people assumed you could hold cosmic rivers and fire curses with a glance. Barbers in secular life were known as Nai and held complex positions within caste systems. In rural communities, they were more than groomers. They were ritual specialists, matchmakers and message carriers. They shaved heads at weddings, funerals and festivals, wielding their razors with quiet authority. Often they were among the first to be informed of any major life event, and in some regions a village barber was considered more important than the town priest, because he'd show up faster and bring snacks. The barber's toolkit was humble but effective. A curved razor, a whetstone, a comb, a small mirror, and a bowl of oil, usually coconut or mustard. Shaving cream? Not quite. They'd whip up a frothy lather from soap nuts or chickpea flour mixed with warm water, massaged in gently with circular motions. Some even used a paste of turmeric and sandalwood, not only for its antiseptic qualities, but also for its scent and cooling properties. Basically, your ancient Indian shave came with a built-in spa experience. Barbers carried their kits in wooden boxes, often carved with floral or elephant motifs. Portable, yes. Aesthetic, always. Some even had fold-out seats and small umbrellas so they could set up roadside salons under banyan trees. Imagine this. You're walking home from the market carrying lentils and mangoes, and you pass a barber quietly shaving an old man who's humming a ragam. The scent of neem drifts through the air, birds chirp overhead, and for a brief moment, time folds into poetry. Now, let's talk women. Indian women traditionally grew their hair long, very long, and took exquisite care of it. Weekly oiling sessions weren't just about shine, they were sacred bonding rituals. A mother would sit her daughter down, part her hair with a wooden comb, and apply warm coconut oil infused with hibiscus, fenugreek, or curry leaves. This wasn't just TLC, it was nourishment for the scalp, a shield against the sun, and possibly the earliest form of aromatherapy. Braiding was an art. A single braid down the back could be adorned with flowers, coins, bells, or even gold chains. Married women often wore their hair in intricate buns, while unmarried girls wore twin braids. A widow might cut her hair or tie it plainly, signalling her status in a society where visual cues carried the weight of entire life stories. Certain regional styles stand out. Tamil Nadu's Kondai bun, Andhra's side braids, Bengal's twisted plaits. Each told a story of geography, language and lineage. Fringe scholars even argue that you could map ancient trade routes by tracking hair decoration styles. A bit of a stretch? Maybe. But the visual data doesn't lie. And of course, There were the mystics, the yogis and sadhus, renunciants who let their hair grow wild and matted as a rejection of material vanity. Their dreadlocks, or jata, were not unkempt but intentional, sometimes twisted with ash, sometimes coiled into towering spirals. These spiritual warriors saw hair as both armour and offering. They believed each knot held a story, each lock a lesson in letting go. But let's not pretend ancient India lacked humour. There are Sanskrit poems that make gentle fun of barbers. One describes a barber who talks so much during a shave that he forgets to cut, leaving his customer both hairy and confused. And in the Panchatantra, barbers are often depicted as clever side characters, sharp with both blade and wit. In urban centres like Pataliputra or Ujjain, barbershops were more refined, some even attached to bathhouses. Men would get shaved, massaged, oiled, and sometimes tattooed in a single session. It wasn't just grooming, it was community, conversation, and sometimes consultation on personal matters. Want to propose marriage? Ask your barber first. Need a horoscope reading? Guess who has a cousin who knows a guy? So imagine the scene, a narrow street in ancient Varanasi, cowbells chiming in the distance, the Ganges glittering gold in the morning sun. A young man sits still while a barber gently scrapes away his past life karma. Behind him, children giggle as they receive their first oil braids. A yogi with jata down to his knees passes by, nodding once in silent approval, and overhead, temple bells toll softly, as if marking each snip of the blade. Because in India, a haircut isn't just a haircut, it's a prayer, a promise, and a path to transcendence, one strand at a time. We now sail northward, away from the sun-warmed subcontinent of India, into colder, harsher lands where longboats slice through icy fjords, and the wind howls like a forgotten god. Welcome to the world of the Vikings, a realm of warriors, weavers, poets, and people who, contrary to popular myth, really cared about how they looked. Seriously. If you picture Vikings as unkempt brutes with tangled hair and battle crust, think again. These were people with grooming kits buried alongside their swords, and yes, their haircuts were deliberate, strategic, and even stylish. Let's start in a Norse village at the edge of the known world. Smoke curls from sod-roofed huts, and somewhere near the longhouse, a man sits while another trims his beard with a small iron blade. This isn't some random act of hygiene, it's preparation. For battle, for a feast, for the gods. Vikings valued their hair and beards immensely. Long hair, well maintained, was a sign of strength, virility, and status. The beard especially was sacred, grown, shaped, and oiled with the care of a prized possession. And those elaborate braids, not just for flair, they kept hair out of the way during combat and symbolised one's clan, achievements, and even personal philosophies. That warrior with a double braid and beads, he's telling a story, with his scalp, but first, tools. Viking grooming kits often included small iron scissors, tweezers, combs carved from bone or antler, and ear scoops. Yes, for cleaning ears. These were kept in pouches or hung from belts, sometimes adorned with runes or animal motifs. A man without a comb was like a shield maiden without her spear. Incomplete. And they used them often. According to both archaeological finds and written sources like the sagas and even outsider accounts, Arab traveller Ahmad ibn Fadlan, Norsemen combed their hair daily, bathed weekly, and applied oils to keep hair smooth and scented. Ibn Fadlan was surprised, even unsettled, by how much time these barbarians spent grooming. His notes read like the ancient equivalent of "these dudes moisturise better than I do." Most Viking men wore their hair shoulder length or longer, with the front sometimes shaved or undercut. This practical choice prevented vision-blocking strands in combat, while allowing impressive length elsewhere. Think warrior mullet, but cooler. Fringe scholars argue this asymmetry signified different tribal roles. One side cropped for warriors, both long for farmers, but no consensus has been reached. And the styles, variations galore. Twisted side braids, centre braids, hair tied with sinew or ribbon. Beards were similarly versatile, forked, pointed, beaded, or even adorned with tiny metal clips. These weren't wild brambles. They were tended like sacred gardens. Viking grooming was half function, half fashion, and entirely fierce. Women too embraced hairstyling. Young girls wore loose braids, often tied with woolen cords, while married women coiled their hair into buns or knots, secured with bone pins or silver combs. A woman's hairstyle could indicate her marital status, her family's wealth, or even her availability at a festival. Some styles were regional, like the towering plaits seen in Danish grave goods, or the triple twist buns of Swedish origin. Historians still argue whether these designs were standardised, or simply personal artistry passed down like recipes. Interestingly, grooming was woven into Viking myth. In the Prose Edda, there are references to gods and giants bragging about their hair. Loki once shaved the golden locks of Sif, Thor's wife, just to stir trouble. The resulting chaos leads to the creation of magical hair made of spun gold. Literal divine weave. That's how serious they took hair. Hygiene rituals weren't left to chance. Vikings had access to lye soap. Yes, the caustic kind, which they used sparingly to clean hair and clothing. They often followed up with rinses of beer or vinegar. Sounds wild, but beer contains nutrients that can soften hair, while vinegar balanced the scalp's pH. Fringe beauty trend or proto-salon science? Maybe both. Some warriors even wore helmets with space carved out for their hair to flow or be displayed. The image of fully helmeted, clean-shaven fighters. Roman propaganda. Viking helmets were often open-faced, and a well-braided mane flowing out the back wasn't just intimidating, it was a signal. I'm powerful, I'm prepared, and I moisturise with bare fat and pride. Speaking of fat, animal oils were used as primitive hair products. Bear fat, goose grease and fish oil were mixed with herbs like yarrow, thyme, and even bits of birch bark. Not just to style, but to protect hair from the brutal cold. Some Vikings dyed their hair with ash or crushed berries, though this was more common among younger warriors trying to appear older or fiercer. Let's not forget funerals. Hair featured prominently in death rituals. Warriors might be buried with their combs, razors, or locks of a loved one's hair. In some graves, hair is found coiled and tied in small linen bundles, possibly tokens from family, lovers, or comrades. One grave in Gotland even included braided human hair wrapped around a sword hilt. Creepy or touching? Depends on your stance on weaponized sentimentality. And while most hair rituals were communal, some were fiercely private. Before raids, warriors would cut a symbolic lock of their own hair and toss it into the sea, an offering to Aegir, god of the ocean. This tiny act, almost invisible, was a prayer for safe passage and victory. And if the sea didn't claim them, they might return with not just loot, but new styles borrowed from the lands they pillaged. Early cultural exchange by sword. Women's grooming was no less ritualistic. During festivals like Yule, women would unravel their braids and comb them out beneath the stars, a symbolic cleansing of the past year. Unmarried women were sometimes forbidden to rebraid their hair until after the New Year feast, a way of marking time and intention. Now let's zoom into a snapshot. A young Viking, barely more than a boy, kneels while his older brother trims his hair with care. Not much is said. The iron blade whispers through the strands. The new braid is woven, tight, firm, ready for the first raid. The family comb is passed down. His scalp tingles from the birch oil rubbed in after. When he rises, he is not a child. He is marked, prepared, terrifyingly stylish. Even the Christianization of Scandinavia couldn't shake these traditions overnight. While monks and missionaries brought shorter, modest cuts and tonsures, many Norsemen clung to their styles as acts of quiet rebellion. There are records of church officials complaining that local converts still wore heathen braids at Sunday Mass. Historians still argue whether this defiance was fashion or faith. Probably both. One last note. Viking hair culture has inspired modern obsessions. Braided beard competitions, historically inspired grooming lines, even the recent wave of Norse cosplay all tap into this ancient pride. Turns out, you don't need to believe in Valhalla to appreciate a solid side braid. So, as the night deepens over a snow-dusted longhouse, and the firelight flickers against painted shields, a Viking mother untangles her daughter's braids while humming a lullaby. Nearby, a father oils his beard and sharpens his blade, both equally important, and above them all, the stars shimmer. Watching over a people who carved history not just with axes but with combs. Because in the Viking world, your hair wasn't just grown, it was earned. From the icy fjords and battle braids of the Norse, we journey now to the sun-baked savannas, lush forests and river kingdoms of ancient Africa, where hair isn't merely grown or styled but spoken. That's right. Across the diverse cultures of West Africa, hair has long served as an intricate living language. And in this world, a haircut is not just personal grooming, it's social cartography. It tells who you are, where you come from, what you believe, and sometimes even what you plan to do next. Let's begin in the ancient city of Ife, in present-day Nigeria. It's the 12th century. Terracotta heads with exquisitely detailed hair designs are being moulded, each one as expressive as a fingerprint. These aren't artistic flourishes, they're faithful representations of real hairstyles. And these styles, they are complex, labour-intensive and coded with cultural meaning. Forget messy bun. We're talking about cornrows arranged in starbursts, vertical ridges like waves of status, and sculptural loops that defy gravity, and all carved into clay with the reverence of a royal portrait. Among the Yoruba people, hair is more than decorative, it's sacred. The top of the head, called Ori, is considered the spiritual gateway, the seat of a person's destiny. Styling this area is almost a ritual, often involving prayer, intention, and sometimes song. Hair is tended to with coconut oil, shea butter, and combs carved from ivory or polished wood. And if a barber, often a family member or respected elder, is called to cut it, you better believe it's done with ceremony, not small talk. Now, the barber as we think of him didn't always exist as a distinct profession. In many African societies, hair care was a communal responsibility, particularly among women. But in larger kingdoms and cosmopolitan trading cities like Timbuktu or Benin, professional hairdressers and barbers were well established. They served nobles, merchants, and spiritual leaders, moving deftly between grooming, healing, and advising. In some cases, barbers were even consulted during rites of passage or before major life decisions, because your hair needed to reflect your spirit, not just your scalp. Hair signified everything. Marital status? Check. Tribe? Check. Age, fertility, mourning status, military achievement, spiritual devotion? Double check. One look at someone's head and you'd know who they were, if you knew how to read it. Fringe scholars even liken these patterns to early data encoding systems, a kind of pre-digital identification badge you wear on your skull. Historians still argue whether hairstyles were standardized within each clan or more freely expressive, but it's clear they functioned as visual passports across tribal boundaries. Let's talk about tools. The African barber's kit included small, curved knives or razors, early ones made from sharpened stones or metal alloys, palm oil soap, wood or bone combs, and shears smithed locally or traded from Arab merchants. Some styles were carved by sectioning the hair with string or fishbone picks, others shaped by wrapping hair around rods made from dried reeds. Hair dyes were made from henna, clay, or ground herbs, sometimes as beautification, other times as protection against sun and spirits alike. And the haircuts themselves? Time-consuming, sure, but seen as an investment. Styles could take hours, even days, especially ceremonial ones. Think of it as preparing a crown that never comes off. Some were worn daily, others reserved for rituals, initiation ceremonies, weddings, harvest festivals. Young boys in the Fulani tribe, for example, often had their hair shaved into specific patterns after rites of passage. Meanwhile, girls among the Himba in what is now Namibia began to wear long, ochre-coated dreadlocks signifying puberty and social readiness. Among the Wolof of Senegal, styles like the Ndil involved symmetrical braiding starting from the temples inward, while the Sera people favoured vertical weaves resembling fans. One unique Mande style, called the ladder, featured a central braid with others stacked like rungs, possibly indicating one's progress through life stages. Imagine sitting for 6 hours just to communicate that you've grown as a person. Women's hair also served as emotional billboard. A widow might wear her hair loosely, unbraided, and covered. A bride might wear multiple high-set braids with colourful beads. One Fulani proverb even says, "A woman without braids is a woman without pride." Hair wasn't vanity, it was visibility. Now men were no slouches in the hair department either. Among the Ashanti, warriors wore hair tall and sculpted to intimidate. Kings and chiefs sometimes had barbers on retainer, their daily styling a matter of political image. In some kingdoms, like Dahomey, the king's personal barber was considered a high-ranking official, not just for his skill, but for the secrets he heard while holding a blade so close to royal skin. Some fringe scholars believe these barbers also acted as informants or even spies, haircuts with side quests. Barbers also played a key role in spiritual practices. In some griot traditions, barbers prepared musicians for performance by trimming their hair in sacred patterns, meant to invoke clarity and memory. Some believed the snipping of hair could sever negative energy, or curses, and cutting it improperly could invite misfortune. In the Congo region, diviners used strands of hair as part of oracles, reading the curls and breakage patterns like one might read tea leaves. And let's not ignore the role of humour. Among the Akan people, there are folk tales where mischievous barbers prank customers with uneven cuts, only to be outsmarted by clever girls who restore symmetry using porcupine quills. Yes, ancient comedic barbershop sitcoms existed in oral storytelling form. When it came to grooming rituals, timing mattered. You didn't cut your hair at night, that invited bad spirits. You didn't sweep up the hair until morning, it might be used in sorcery, and you certainly didn't cut your hair during an eclipse. One myth from the Dogon people tells of a young boy who trimmed his hair under a blood moon and woke up speaking in riddles. Historians still debate whether this was metaphor or mistranslated mischief. In urban areas like ancient Carthage, yes, in North Africa, but influenced by both African and Mediterranean traditions, barbershops catered to elite merchants and generals. There, Roman-style tools met African hairstyling techniques, resulting in hybrid cuts that confused archaeologists for decades. The legacy of African grooming extended into diaspora cultures as well, influencing hair care traditions across the Atlantic. Let's pause for a moment in the Kingdom of Benin. A young girl, newly betrothed, sits surrounded by women from her mother's lineage. Each holds a comb, a flower, or a string of coral beads. The eldest begins braiding while singing a story. One braid for loyalty, one for laughter, one for lineage. As the hours pass, her head becomes a tapestry, a crown, a declaration of her entry into womanhood. Outside, boys drum. Inside, her hair speaks louder than words, and when she grows old, her granddaughter will learn these patterns, not from a book, but from her fingertips. Because in ancient Africa, hair is not just grown or cut. It is spoken, it is remembered, it is history written in strands. The drums of West Africa fade into silence as we journey west across the Atlantic, landing in the vibrant heartlands of ancient Mesoamerica, a place where obsidian blades glint under the high sun, temples rise in geometric splendour, and every hair on a person's head holds weight in ritual, rank, and cosmic destiny. In these civilizations, Aztec, Maya, Olmec, and beyond, hair wasn't merely a matter of personal taste, it was cosmological. Let's begin with the Maya, a people whose culture shimmered with intellectual sophistication and aesthetic ambition. Among them, hair served not only as an extension of the self, but as a declaration of cosmic alignment. Head shape, forehead slope, and yes, hairline were deliberately crafted from infancy. Babies' skulls were often bound with wooden boards to achieve the desired elongation, aligning the cranium with the shape of maize, sacred corn, and the hair, it was styled to match. Men's hairstyles often began with the forehead. A flat, sloped brow was considered beautiful, so hairlines were shaved to accentuate the effect. Some records indicate that young Maya men had their heads partially shaved, leaving a thick crest of hair at the crown, often sculpted and stiffened with clay or sap. It wasn't just about looks, it was symbolism. That hair crest could mimic a deity's headdress, or the rising plume of a quetzal, the sacred bird of kings. Maya women wore their hair long, parted in the centre, and often wrapped into thick braids or buns adorned with ribbons, jade, or flowers. Hairstyles were tailored to occasion, ceremonial, marital, mourning, and more. A single twist of hair could signal fertility, faith, or family lineage. And just as with their architectural masterpieces, symmetry and proportion mattered. Now imagine a Maya noble preparing for a ritual. An attendant applies scented resin to his hair, parting it with a comb carved from bone, while another servant adds a headdress of quetzal feathers. He stands before a mirror, polished obsidian, black and smooth, and examines his reflection. Not for vanity, for readiness, for sacred presence. Which brings us to the tools. No bronze, no iron, but obsidian. Volcanic glass sharper than any metal blade of its time. Obsidian razors were used not just for haircuts, but for bloodletting rituals, sacrifices, and ceremonial shaves. It's estimated that obsidian tools could slice with surgical precision, though without modern painkillers, That sharpness was probably more terrifying than helpful during a quick trim. Combs were made from wood, bone, or thorns. Some doubled as lice combs. Maya and Aztec nobility often used combs decorated with glyphs or animal motifs. A nobleman's comb might depict a jaguar, symbol of strength. A priest's might show an owl, an omen-bearing messenger. It's possible that barbers themselves selected specific combs depending on the occasion. Scholars still debate whether the designs carried spiritual power or were just early branding choices. Among the Aztecs, hair took on even more martial and religious importance. Warriors wore distinct styles to show rank and achievement. The highest honour, the Tlahuistli haircut, awarded to eagle and jaguar warriors. These elite fighters often shaved the back of their heads while leaving thick tufts or topknots at the front, a style both intimidating and symbolic. The topknot represented the sun, war and sacrifice. If you saw a man with that do, you stepped aside. Hair was also used to shame. Captured warriors or disgraced individuals were often shaved completely. Among the Aztecs, it was considered deeply humiliating to be bald, as it stripped a man of both power and identity. In battle, scalping wasn't always about the scalp. It was about the hair. Aztec priests, meanwhile, wore their hair long and matted, rarely cutting it except during specific rituals. They sometimes tied it with cords of maguey fibre and let it become thick with incense and ash. Their locks absorbed the residue of countless ceremonies, effectively making their hair a living record of devotion. Young Aztec boys had their hair tied in a single lock at the back of the head, known as a temilotl. This lock was kept until they captured their first prisoner in battle, at which point it was ceremonially cut off, marking their transition into adulthood. Think of it as an epic warrior bar mitzvah, with a blade instead of a blessing. Women's hair had its own significance. Aztec women usually wore it parted in the middle, with two large buns on either side of the head, often interpreted as symbols of maize or the moon. Married women wore their hair differently from maidens, and widows might shave their heads in mourning. One poem from the Codex Florentine describes a bride's hair being combed by her mother before the wedding, each stroke paired with advice, hopes, and a bit of weeping. Let's not skip the Olmecs, the so-called mother culture of Mesoamerica. Olmec sculptures show complex hairstyles, coiled buns, tightly wrapped braids, and even mohawks. Some fringe theorists argue these early styles influenced later warrior traditions across the region. Others claim the styles mimicked jaguar fur patterns or maize husks. Historians still argue whether these interpretations are valid or just romantic speculation. Now, remember those temples. Hair offerings were common. A priest might cut a lock from a devotee and offer it to the gods alongside incense and cacao. One Maya ritual involved parents cutting a child's hair during a naming ceremony, offering the cut strands to Chak, the rain god, in hopes of securing agricultural blessings. Cut hair was sometimes buried under stele, stone monuments, or mixed into construction mortar, adding literal strands of life to sacred architecture. The barbers themselves, they weren't always specialists in our sense, but rather multi-skilled attendants, priests, warriors, or family elders trained in grooming rites. In larger city-states, however, particularly under the Aztec Empire, there were professional hairdressers known as tzoncohuani, which loosely translates to one who arranges hair. These individuals served at court, preparing nobles and officials before feasts, battles, or ceremonies. The training? Mostly oral and observational. A young apprentice would spend years learning not just how to style, but when and why. The wrong cut at the wrong time could be disastrous. One fringe account tells of a high-ranking noble punished for adopting a warrior's hairstyle before earning the right, like someone today showing up to a military ball in full medals they never earned. Then there's the role of hair in disguise. Spies or messengers might alter their hair to infiltrate rival city-states. Dyes made from cochineal crushed beetles, charcoal, or certain barks could change hair colour. There's even some evidence of wigs made from plant fibres or woven reeds used in dramatic performances or rituals. Theatre and espionage, held together with clay and beetle juice. And in times of mourning, entire families might shave their heads, or let their hair grow wild and unkempt as a sign of internal chaos. The state of your hair mirrored the state of your soul. Let's picture it now, a bustling market in Tenochtitlan, where traders haggle over turquoise, cacao and feathers. Amid the noise, a noblewoman sits beneath a canopy, while her stylist weaves jade beads into her braids. Nearby, a boy receives his first temple shave. A warrior adjusts his top knot and watches the horizon for omens. And across the city, priests prepare obsidian blades for a full moon ritual that will end with hair and maybe blood left at the altar. In this world, every strand is a symbol, every style a sentence in a language of stars, gods, and ancestry. Because in Mesoamerica, hair wasn't merely trimmed, it was aligned with the cosmos. As the obsidian mirrors of Mesoamerica fade into darkness, the scene shifts again, this time to a world of stone cloisters, echoing chants, and the scent of beeswax candles. Welcome to medieval Europe, where tonsured monks walk in slow, deliberate steps through draughty abbeys, and barbers wield razors not just for style, but for salvation. In these centuries cloaked in superstition and devotion, the haircut transforms yet again, from ornament to obedience, from vanity to vow. Let's set the scene in a Benedictine monastery around the 9th century. Morning bells toll, and a young novice kneels before his abbot. In one hand, the abbot holds a wooden bowl of oil. In the other, a small iron razor. With solemn chants in the background, the boy's hair is cut away, leaving a bare circle at the top of his scalp, the tonsure, a ring of baldness like a solar halo. It marks his submission to God, his departure from worldly pride. There were different kinds of tonsures across medieval Europe. The Roman tonsure, most familiar, left a ring of hair like a monk's crown. The Celtic tonsure, used in earlier Irish Christianity, shaved the front half of the head from ear to ear, giving monks a look that some historians describe as medieval reverse mullet. The Eastern Orthodox tonsure typically involved a full shave. Scholars still debate whether the differences were theological or simply a matter of regional flair. Either way, the result was the same: humility, obedience, and a mild risk of sunburn. The tonsure was not fashionable, it wasn't flattering, but it was visible. A man's hair declared his soul's allegiance. Walking down a road with that bald spot meant people knew you had renounced earthly pleasures. Though ironically, lice didn't seem to get the memo. Indeed, lice were a major concern. Monks, for all their spiritual aspirations, were not immune to pest problems. In fact, some orders permitted weekly shaving of the head not only for religious reasons, but to control infestations. Hair removal in this context was both symbolic and sanitary, and yes, the process was often communal. One monk would shave another with slow, careful strokes, and they'd switch roles weekly. Think of it as mutual grooming with a Gregorian soundtrack. Barbers in medieval society weren't limited to monasteries, of course. In towns and cities they held an eclectic set of roles. Your local barber could cut your hair, shave your beard, lance a boil, extract a tooth, apply leeches, and, if needed, perform minor surgery. They were called barber surgeons, and their poles, yes, those iconic red and white stripes, symbolised their trade. The red for blood, white for bandages, and sometimes blue for veins, depending on regional flair. That cheery pole outside the shop, it might have been spinning after someone's molar was yanked without anaesthesia. Most barbershops were dim, wooden, and functional. A small fire for boiling water, a leather chair, iron shears, straight razors, a strop, a bowl for shaving soap made from animal fat and lye. Scissors were rare. More often they used knives and razors. Mirrors? A polished metal disc. Or, if you were lucky, a shard of glass imported from Venice. Hair trends among medieval laymen were tightly tethered to status, religion, and sometimes military service. Knights and nobles kept their hair relatively short, especially during campaigns, to reduce lice and stay helmet-ready. Beards went in and out of fashion. During Charlemagne's time, full beards were considered noble. Later, in the 11th and 12th centuries, clean-shaven faces became associated with piety and civility. Then, come the Crusades, facial hair made a triumphant return, partly from Eastern influence, partly from sheer inconvenience. Peasants. Their hair was usually practical, cropped short or left to grow freely, depending on resources and weather. Washing hair was rare, but combing was common. Wooden combs with close-set teeth were passed down in families. Some even had charms carved into them to ward off lice or bring good dreams. Women's hair, meanwhile, lived under strict societal rules. Unmarried girls wore their hair long and loose or in braids, often tied with ribbons. Married women were expected to cover their hair entirely with wimples, veils, or linen wraps. exposing your hair after marriage. Scandalous. Only loose women, or saints in ecstatic visions, let their hair fly free. Hair like hemline signalled virtue. And then there were the sumptuary laws, legal edicts that dictated who could wear what. In some places, laws restricted hair accessories based on class. Golden combs, jewelled pins, elaborate veils, reserved for nobility. One law in England forbade common women from wearing elaborate headdresses that could mislead men of higher station, a medieval version of stay in your lane. Despite the restrictions, hair care was creative. Medieval recipes survive detailing shampoos made from egg whites, vinegar rinses and herbal washes, using rosemary, nettle or sage. Some women used crushed ivy leaves to darken their hair or chamomile to lighten it. And though dyes were more common in later centuries, some daring souls experimented with saffron, sulphur or soot for colour, not always safely. Historians still argue whether the famous green dye of 13th century French courtiers was fashionable or just the result of mould. Let's return to monasteries for a moment. Tonsures weren't just symbolic, they were used in disciplinary action. A novice monk caught breaking rules might be partially shaved in public, left with tufts to indicate shame. Or conversely, a monk who reached a new spiritual level might receive a more refined tonsure. One account from a Bavarian abbey describes a monk weeping joyfully as his tonsure was expanded. A greater crown for a greater vow. Barbers also served on battlefields. Travelling with armies, they shaved wounded men, cleaned wounds, and occasionally acted as morticians. The line between haircut and amputation was worryingly thin. One satirical poem from 12th century England pokes fun at a barber surgeon who cut more throats by carelessness than he ever did on purpose. Ouch. Of course, not everyone followed the rules. Some wandering mystics and heretics wore wild hair as protest. The Cathars, for example, rejected the church's authority and often appeared dishevelled on purpose, hair as rebellion, hair as sermon. Fringe scholars suggest some of these groups developed their own anti-tonsure as a silent jab at the church's power. The debate continues. Let's not forget the role of hair in romance and storytelling. Courtly love poems often praise a lady's hair in lavish metaphors, golden as wheat, soft as silk, tangled like destiny. Knights sometimes wore a lock of their lady's hair in battle, tied to a sword hilt or kept in a locket. One French tale tells of a squire who swapped places with a nobleman simply because he possessed a braided lock. Plot twist. The hair was a horse's tail. Spoiler alert, things did not end well. And then there were pilgrimages. Before undertaking a sacred journey to Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela or Rome, many pilgrims cut their hair short or shaved it entirely as a gesture of humility. Others let it grow wild, claiming it absorbed the sins they hoped to shed at journey's end. One 14th century traveller describes a man with hair so long and full of dust that he seemed a walking broom. Picture now a small village barbershop near the abbey. The barber, also the local tooth puller and marriage counsellor in secret, sharpens his blade by firelight. A monk steps in, head bowed, ready for his weekly trim. Behind him, a young peasant boy waits for his own ceremonial cut before apprenticing as a scribe. In the corner, a travelling knight polishes his boots, humming a hymn and waiting his turn. Outside, snow begins to fall, soft, steady and silent. The barber picks up his razor, because in the Middle Ages hair wasn't just hair, it was devotion, identity, and sometimes your only mirror to the divine. From the shadowy cloisters of Europe our path bends east again, winding through temples and bamboo forests into the land of rising suns and descending blades. Feudal Japan. Here, amidst the delicate clink of teacups and the thud of wooden sandals, hair was more than aesthetics. It was honour, it was duty, it was code. The samurai didn't just wield swords with deadly precision, they applied the same discipline to their top knots, and heaven help the barber who cut a warrior's hair without understanding its weight. Let's descend into Edo, Japan's capital during the Tokugawa shogunate. It's the 17th century. Cherry blossoms drift like paper confetti over narrow alleys, and inside a small wooden shop, the kamiyui, hairdresser, sharpens his blade. This isn't your average grooming stop, this is serious business. The client, a samurai, stoic, composed, armour nearby. The hairstyle, the iconic shonmeige. Now, the shonmeige is not your hipster top knot. It's a meticulously crafted blend of shaved pate and tied crown, where the front and top of the head are completely shorn, leaving a remaining section of hair that is slicked back and tied into a tight bun resting on the shaved dome. The reason? Function and symbolism. Originally, the shomage allowed samurai helmets, or kabuto, to fit snugly during battle. The shaved front prevented sweat build-up and slippage, while the top knot secured the helmet in place. But over time, it evolved into a societal badge, a sign of status, discipline, and unwavering loyalty. If your top knot was crooked, you weren't just unkempt, you were dishonoured. The kami-yui's tools were precise. A straight-edge razor called a kamisori, scissors, introduced later from China, and combs carved from wood or tortoiseshell. He would begin by applying warm water to soften the scalp, followed by a delicate shave that required absolute stillness. Many samurai would close their eyes and meditate during the process. Mistakes weren't just embarrassing, they could spark duels. You think Yelp reviews are brutal? Try cutting off a warrior's honour tuft. Apprentices trained for years under master stylists. In the capital, high-ranking samurai often employed personal barbers who worked from private quarters or small shops adorned with family crests and calligraphy. A good barber had to memorize not just cutting techniques, but protocols of deference, correct bowing angles, and which family styles were permitted by class. There were variations of the shonmage, after all, some higher, some flatter, some looped. Fringe historians even argue that shonmage height subtly signalled political allegiance. Samurai as walking political memes? Perhaps. Hair also played a role in samurai oaths. When retiring from active service, a samurai might cut off his top knot in a solemn ceremony called datemage. It wasn't just a haircut. It was a retirement announcement, an identity shift, sometimes even a political statement. Surrendering your shonmage could be seen as relinquishing your place in the world of warriors. It wasn't done lightly. Women, too, had strict hair rituals. During the Edo period, women wore their hair in complex updos called nihongami, styles that changed based on age, class, and occasion. A married woman's hair was different from a courtesan's, and both differed from a geisha's, whose shimada style, looped buns with intricate decorations, required hours to perfect. These styles weren't just beautiful, they were informative. One glance and you knew who you were dealing with. Geisha and courtesans had professional stylists who often used waxes and oils to sculpt gravity-defying shapes. Decorative pins, combs and kanzashi, ornamental hair sticks, added symbolism. Cranes for longevity, cherry blossoms for fleeting beauty. And once styled, these coiffures were sacred. Women often slept with their heads on wooden neck blocks. Yes, actual furniture, to preserve their hair overnight. Comfort? Optional. Beauty? Non-negotiable. Hair was so symbolic that cutting it could be a punishment. Criminals might be partially shaved, publicly humiliated. In some cases, disobedient wives had their hair shorn as a mark of dishonour. It's brutal, yes, but a stark indicator of how deeply identity was embedded in every strand. There's even a spiritual dimension. In Zen Buddhism, monks shaved their heads entirely, a sign of detachment and humility. The Tokudo ceremony, where a layperson becomes a monk, includes the shaving of the head with slow, deliberate chants. The idea, by removing vanity, one clears the path to enlightenment. The razor becomes a spiritual scalpel. Meanwhile, sumo wrestlers wear their hair in a top knot too, but with different rules. Their mage is styled to resemble a ginkgo leaf and indicates their ranking. The top knot is maintained by a special hairdresser called a tokoyama, who may spend years perfecting the art. Losing your top knot in sumo is no small matter. Upon retirement, a danpatsu shiki, or top knot cutting ceremony is held. Fellow wrestlers and mentors each take a snip, symbolising the end of a sacred career. During the Edo period, commoners began adopting samurai-like styles, but laws were swiftly passed to restrict them. Only certain classes could wear certain types of knots, buns, or even use certain comb materials. Some barbers were even arrested for enabling style infringements. Hair as intellectual property, basically. And let's not forget Ronin, the masterless samurai. Often portrayed in literature as dishevelled, wild-haired, drifting swordsmen, their unkempt appearance wasn't just narrative flourish. It reflected their fall from grace. In reality, many Ronin maintained their top knots out of pride, but without a master to pay for maintenance, the look often frayed. Some deliberately cut their top knot to hide their status, disappearing into anonymity. Others wore wigs to blend in, a dangerous game of style camouflage. Barbershops themselves varied by region. In Edo proper, you might find a multi-chair shop with rice paper walls and stylists in crisp kimono. In the countryside, the local barber might also be the town's scribe or sack brewer. One scroll from the 18th century even shows a travelling barber setting up shop under a maple tree. His tools laid out on a bamboo mat, with a line of elderly men waiting nearby and one child screaming in the background. Some things never change. For children, the kamazome, first haircut ceremony, marked a transition from infancy to early childhood. This often occurred at the age of 3 or 5 and involved cutting a small section of hair while offering prayers to local kami. The cut hair might be kept in a family shrine or floated down a river. It's the Edo version of a baby book, minus the awkward drawings. Hair also played a role in storytelling. Ghosts, or yurei, were often depicted with long, dishevelled black hair, a symbol of untamed emotion, especially revenge. One legend tells of a spirit whose hair grew longer each time she was wronged, eventually reaching through keyholes and strangling her enemies in their sleep. Spooky, yes, but also a clear metaphor for how emotions like hair grow when left unattended. And speaking of metaphors, many Edo poems and haiku use hair as imagery for time, impermanence, and love. A single strand, plucked and knotted into a letter, was sometimes sent as a token of longing. Lovers separated by class or geography might trade locks of hair, braided and hidden in pouches or sewn into kimono linings. The phrase, "your hair brushed my dreams," appears in more than one diary. Let's pause here. Picture a narrow Edo street at dusk. Lanterns flicker. A samurai walks briskly, his topknot neat, his swords at his side. Inside a small shop, a barber lights incense, heats water, and prepares his blade. A geisha enters next, hair stiff with wax and decorated with falling cherry blossoms. Outside, a monk bows low, his head shaved clean, his path clear. Because in feudal Japan, every hairstyle was a statement, a vow, a warning, and every haircut, a ceremony. From the meticulous top knots of Edo's samurai, we now ride the wind across open steppes and endless skies, where the land curves like a saddle and every sunrise starts a new migration. Welcome to the world of the nomads, horseback empires, travelling tribes, and windswept warriors who carry their barbershops in saddlebags and their mirrors in lakes. In this realm, where yurts dot the horizon and speed is life, grooming must adapt. Hair care here is minimalist, mobile, and, surprisingly, meaningful. We begin with the Mongols. Yes, those fierce, fast-moving conquerors who stitched together the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. Led by Genghis Khan and his kin, the Mongols valued order and symbolism even in their hairstyles. You'd think living on horseback, conquering entire continents, left no time for grooming. You'd be wrong. Let's picture a Mongol warrior prepping for battle. He kneels beside a mountain stream, using the reflective water as his mirror. He pulls out a small leather pouch. Inside, a bronze knife, a bone comb, and a ball of scented fat. Perhaps sheep's tallow mixed with thyme. With practiced fingers, he parts his hair in the middle and ties it into tight braids behind each ear. The front remains shaved, the back gathered in a knot or queue. The look, iconic, intimidating, identifiable. This style, known among the Mongols as the bokta, wasn't just for flair. It served function, keeping hair out of the eyes during archery, and form, symbolising readiness, clan affiliation, and warrior status. The shaved forehead gave a clean silhouette under a helmet, while the braids told others where you belonged. Historians still argue whether braid patterns were strictly tribal or more fluid, but consensus says they mattered. And who did the trimming? Often, it was done communally. A trusted comrade, a sibling, even a parent. In some noble families, barbers travelled with the group, especially if they served high-ranking khans. These mobile stylists carried tools of bronze or iron, plus portable mirrors made from polished copper. They operated wherever the yurt was pitched. Grassland grooming, it was a thing. Even Genghis Khan had strict grooming expectations for his court. Sources like The Secret History of the Mongols describe decrees around personal cleanliness. Warriors were expected to bathe weekly, or as often as water allowed, comb their hair, and present themselves with pride. Personal grooming reflected respect for oneself, one's ancestors, and one's companions. In Mongol culture, hair was also spiritual. Women wore their hair long and thick, often braided and adorned with beads or metal rings. Married women coiled their braids into horn-like shapes on either side of their head, sometimes called bog tag. These weren't just styles, they were visual signals of marital status, fertility and clan allegiance. And yes, the designs were elaborate enough to stop a caravan. Children's hair had its own rituals. In many Central Asian cultures, a child's first haircut, called besik toy, or kasha, was a celebration involving music, gifts and feasting. Friends and relatives would each take a symbolic snip, blessing the child's health and journey ahead. The cut hair was sometimes buried, burned, or tied to a family relic. Hair was never thrown away casually. It could be used by spirits or enemies. The Turkic nomads shared similar practices. In the ancient steppes, warriors of the Gökturks and later the Seljuks often wore their hair long, tied at the nape, with moustaches curled like falcon wings. Beards, however, were often trimmed short, a rarity in medieval Eurasia. Why? Because facial hair could catch in helmet clasps or get tangled in bowstrings. Functional style at its finest. Women among Turkic tribes braided their hair daily, sometimes into up to 40 small plaits, especially for weddings or seasonal festivals. One bridal style involved interlacing red thread through the braids to symbolise vitality and protection. Fringe scholars suggest this practice was echoed in later Slavic and Baltic traditions, hinting at cultural crosswinds across the steppes. Nomadic barbers weren't just haircutters, they were also herbalists, matchmakers, and sometimes oral historians. While trimming your hair, they might recount clan legends or recite lineages. Hair as memory, style as storytelling. One Kazakh legend speaks of a barber who could predict the future by reading the fall of a client's trimmed locks. Was he accurate? History doesn't say. But he never lacked for customers. Hair care in these environments was adapted to scarcity. Without easy access to clean water, washing was done with fermented mare's milk, ashes or melted snow mixed with herbs. Combs were often boiled in vinegar to prevent lice. Oiling the hair with animal fat kept it flexible in the dry air and prevented breakage from the wind. And yes, headgear played a part. Fur hats, felt caps, and silk scarves all preserved styles between washes. Among the Scythians, earlier steppe nomads who roamed from the Black Sea to China, hairstyles varied from tall, ridged buns to shoulder-length curls tied with gold bands. Archaeological finds in Pazyryk tombs show combs, razors, and even tattoo needles, suggesting grooming was embedded in daily life and the afterlife. Some scholars believe certain hairstyles imitated animal motifs, aligning the wearer with the power of eagles, wolves, or deer. Hair also marked mourning. After a death, men might cut off a braid and bury it with the deceased. Women might unbraid their hair for days, letting it hang wild as a sign of grief. There are reports of warriors cutting their top knots before battle, dedicating the fight to the fallen. Hair was the banner of the soul. Let's talk travel. On long journeys, nomads carried compact grooming kits tied to saddle horns. One wooden box might contain a comb, a folding razor, a waxed cloth for polishing tools, and a small vial of oil. At river campsites, men would gather to shave or braid each other's hair, often while singing traditional songs. One Tuvan folk tune describes a warrior combing his brother's hair before leaving for battle. "If I fall, carry my braid to mother." Barbers also played a part in peace talks. When two tribes signed a truce, they might exchange locks of hair as a gesture of trust. Some would intertwine braids from both parties into a ceremonial rope, a literal strand of alliance. Cut that rope, and the treaty was broken. Hair as contract, hair as witness. And while women's styles were often more elaborate, men's grooming was no less respected. A crooked braid could indicate laziness. A dry scalp might mean bad luck. Some warriors wore protective talismans braided into their hair, small pouches of salt, dried herbs, or slivers of bone. Fringe scholars even argue that some nomadic tribes used hair as a calendar, trimming it in specific patterns during equinoxes or lunar festivals. No solid proof, but compelling whispers from the dust. Let's settle into a moment. On the high steppes of Mongolia, a young girl sits beside her grandmother. The elder slowly parts her hair, weaving thick braids while humming a lullaby. Nearby, her brother sharpens a knife and checks his reflection in a bowl of water. Their father, just returned from a trading caravan, shows them a new comb, carved from jade. They laugh, share milk tea, and pass the comb from hand to hand. Because here, in this world of motion, hair is the one constant. It's worn on horseback, it's braided under stars, and it always, always travels with you. From the whispering grasses of the steppes, we gallop forward in time to the polished cobblestones and blossoming courts of Renaissance Europe, a place where the world is being rediscovered, reimagined, and, most crucially for our tale, restyled. Hair, once bound by religious rite and tribal identity, now spins into a glorious dance of science, sensuality, and sometimes utter absurdity. Welcome to the Renaissance, where art flourishes, ideas collide, and the barbershop becomes a theatre of ambition. Let's start in 15th century Florence, where Michelangelo is still sketching nudes and Machiavelli's pen itches with ideas on power. Down the street from the cathedral, you'll find a narrow shop, half hidden by tapestries and the waft of lavender oil. Inside, your Renaissance barber. But don't be fooled by the humble setup. This man might trim your beard, bleed your arm, prescribe you a tonic, and update you on papal gossip, all before breakfast. By now, barber surgeons are a formal trade guild across Europe. Their pole, the classic red and white spiral, symbolises their dual duties, red for blood, white for bandages. Some even add blue, possibly for veins, or perhaps as an homage to the French flag once nationalism rises. Either way, the pole spins, and so does the profession. Men's hair is evolving. Gone are the simple monkish crops. Enter the Renaissance mullet. Nobles wear shoulder-length hair parted down the middle, styled with curls and waves and made glossy with pomades of goose fat and rosewater. Think painter with a trust fund chic. Beards, once frowned upon in earlier centuries, are staging a comeback, especially as older scholars emulate classical philosophers like Socrates or Seneca. The philosopher's beard becomes fashionable, the trick making it look like you don't care while spending 2 hours grooming it. Barbers now offer curling irons, heated over coals, and various tonics. One Venetian recipe for hair oil includes olive oil, crushed violets, and a few drops of civet musk. Historians still argue whether it was effective or just very confident. Women's hair, of course, enters an entirely new dimension. In Florence, Venice, and Paris, noblewomen pull their hair high into elaborate braided towers. In some circles, high foreheads are all the rage, so much so that women pluck or shave their hairlines upward to achieve the egghead profile popularised in court portraits. Yes, self-inflicted receding hairlines were once the pinnacle of beauty. Catherine de' Medici herself was said to have removed eyebrow hair to emphasise her forehead's noble slope. Wigs are gaining popularity, especially among ageing nobles or those suffering from syphilitic hair loss, a very Renaissance problem. These wigs aren't quite the powdered confections of later centuries, but they are styled with finesse, sometimes incorporating silk ribbons, pearls, or even tiny birds' feathers. A successful wig-maker could earn more than a poet, and arguably had a bigger cultural impact. And let's not skip Queen Elizabeth III, as though more Tudor than Renaissance, she bridges the eras with her flame-red wigs, towering collars, and hair so heavily starched it could probably deflect an arrow. She makes ginger hair a trend across Europe, leading to all manner of dye experiments, from saffron to sulphur. Fringe scholars suggest some court ladies endured chemical burns in pursuit of that iconic hue. Worth it? They thought so. Back to the barbers. These guys aren't just stylists, they're early chemists. They create ointments, spot removers, and, eventually, rudimentary hair dyes. One popular formula for darkening hair includes boiled walnut husks, iron filings, and vinegar. The result? A rich brown, and possibly a mild case of dermatitis. Barbers also continue to serve as physicians. Need a tooth pulled? They've got you. Leech therapy? No problem. Bloodletting, blistering, purging, all available right beside your comb and scissors. Some barbers keep jars of leeches in the window, like a bizarre pre-modern fish tank. And yet their status is mixed. Too low to dine with physicians, but too vital to ignore. They live in the space between service and science. Now let's talk salons. By the late 1500s, grooming spaces evolve into semi-public venues for news, jokes, and philosophical sparring. In Paris, barbers become conversation leaders. Some host informal salons, precursors to cafes, where customers sip herbal infusions and argue over which poet is most divine. The hairdryer hasn't been invented, but the hot air is flowing. And yes, some barbers write, literally. There are Renaissance barber poets who publish sonnets alongside shaving guides. One Spanish barber named Hernando includes a treatise on the sacred geometry of the beard. Fringe theory or aesthetic genius? You decide. hair as punishment continues in certain quarters. Criminals and adulterers might be shaved in public. In some cities, accused heretics are tonsured with jagged razors before execution. The message: this is not just a death, it's a haircut of shame. Some widows voluntarily cut their hair as a mourning rite. Others grow it long in defiance. Either way, hair speaks. And religion still lingers. Monks keep their tonsures, though some Protestant reformers ditch the look entirely. In Puritan England, elaborate hairstyles become suspect. One critic accuses hair architects of summoning vanity demons through braids. Others simply frown at the time it takes. After all, shouldn't that hour spent curling be used for prayer? Let's visit the ladies of Renaissance France. At court, the hennin headdress, a tall, cone-shaped structure often draped with veils, dominates style for decades. Hair is pulled into tight buns beneath it, then sometimes extended with wire frames. Picture a unicorn merged with a bridal veil. These towering styles require prep time, patience, and significant neck strength. Later, double-horned styles emerge, shaped by hair padding and gauze, giving noble women an almost mythical silhouette. The lower classes, of course, keep things simpler. Men wear cropped hair, perhaps brushed with a boar bristle brush. Women braid theirs or keep it pinned beneath a scarf or coif. Rural barbershops are functional, usually part of a larger tavern or bakery, and operate on barter. A shave for a chicken, a haircut for a loaf of bread. But even peasants indulge during festivals. At harvest celebrations or solstice feasts, young men might decorate their beards with flower petals. Girls oil their braids with rosemary and thread in bits of ribbon. The village square becomes a runway, however muddy. Hair superstition continues. Never cut your hair on a Sunday. It invites misfortune. Always bury your hair clippings. If a witch gets them, she could curse you. Some families keep a child's first lock in a family Bible. Others burn it on Midsummer's Eve for luck. And in the universities, students often rebel against haircut regulations. Some wear academic cuts, short on the sides, long on top. Others let their hair grow wild, quoting Plato between comb strokes. A 1590s pamphlet mocks philosopher dandies who spend more time on their curls than their classes. Now picture the scene. A Renaissance barbershop in Venice. Light streams through stained glass. A nobleman sits reclined, a barber lathering his chin with goat milk soap. In the corner, a merchant debates a sea captain over whose beard is better. One oiled with clove, the other waxed into points. A lute plays softly in the background. Outside, gondolas glide. Because in the Renaissance, hair isn't just fashion, it's renaissance of the self. As the elegance of the Renaissance begins to curdle into extravagance, we drift into the 17th and 18th centuries, an age of powdered wigs, towering coiffures, an aristocratic flair so elaborate it borders on theatrical parody. Welcome to the pre-revolutionary courts of Europe, especially France, where hair becomes not just a statement of wealth and taste, but a baroque battle cry. And in this gilded world, barbers and wig makers rise to positions of near political power, wielding combs with the gravitas of sceptres. Let's enter Versailles. The palace gleams like a golden mirage, and somewhere within its 700 rooms, a marquise is seated in front of a mirror that stretches nearly floor to ceiling. Her hairdresser, part artist, part engineer, is balancing on a stool, arms deep in a sculptural masterpiece of hair, wire, and dreams. This is not a simple updo. It's the pouf, a gravity-defying confection of teased natural hair, augmented with horsehair, padded with silk and anchored with pins, wax, and pure will. The most outrageous poufs can rise over 2 feet tall. They're adorned with everything from miniature ships to silk flowers to model windmills. There are reports of hairpieces built to commemorate military victories, complete with flags. One woman's pouf reportedly featured a birdcage. Yes, a functioning birdcage, with a bird. And who makes this possible? Enter the wig maker, known as a perruquier. This isn't a humble tradesman, it's a court fixture, often male, and often as flamboyant as his work. He creates powdered wigs for kings and queens, advisors and artists. He attends daily to the powdered elite, dusting their curls with scented starches made from wheat flour and crushed orris root. Lavender for the romantic, bergamot for the bold. Powdering wasn't just fashion, it was a fragrant strategy. The origins of the wig craze trace partly to King Louis XIII, who began wearing wigs to cover hair loss, possibly from illness or fashion panic. His son, Louis XIV, elevated the practice into cultural law. The Sun King owned over 40 wigs. He had one for hunting, one for sleeping, one for war, and, supposedly, a wig reserved for receiving foreign dignitaries. When Louis wore a new style, the court followed. Overnight, what was once a cover-up became a symbol of divine monarchy. Men's wigs came in various styles. The full-bottomed wig, favoured in the late 1600s, was a voluminous cascade of curls that flowed past the shoulders. By the 18th century, styles narrowed. The queue featured a ponytail tied with a ribbon. The club style looped the hair and stuffed it into a silk bag. The bob cropped short around the ears. Judges still wear this style today in Britain, a powdered fossil of aristocratic decorum. Women's wigs were even more elaborate. Built around padded frames and latticed with real hair, they required scaffolding of wire and hours of styling. Servants slept in shifts. Stylists used paste, pomade, flour, and often candles to shape the wigs. One account claims a stylist used a butter churn as inspiration. Another suggests women tilted their heads for hours to allow set wax to harden. Sleeping in such wigs was near impossible. So many women slept sitting up, propped on special cushions. Or they wore night wigs, lightweight powdered replicas used for bedtime lounging, in case of surprise guests or sudden scandal. There was even a name for the daily wig application process, lever, meaning to rise, as in, Her Ladyship's morning rise. You didn't just wake up, you were elevated. These wigs weren't cheap. The finest ones were made from human hair, often imported from peasant women in rural France or Italy. Less expensive versions used horsehair or goat wool. Some wigs cost more than a year's wages for a lower-class worker. And yet people saved, because wigs meant status. Wigs meant belonging. Powdering wigs became a ritual. Men stood in front of servants who applied powder with bellows. Yes, actual fireplace bellows filled with flour. 1 puff, 2 puffs, then a cloud of scent and authority. White was most common, but blue, lavender, and even pink powders existed for special occasions. Of course, powdered hair attracted vermin. Lice were a constant concern. Wigs were kept on wig stands, sometimes in their own wig closets, and combed daily with fine-toothed combs dipped in vinegar. Meanwhile, barbers adapted. Some pivoted to wig maintenance, others became full-time stylists, or even barbershop owners with powdered stations and shelves of pomades. A barber might offer shaves, leeching, gossip, and wig restoration all in one stop. In London and Paris, entire streets were devoted to hair fashion. Perruquier's Row, one wag called it. Hair continued to signal status, and sometimes punishment. During the French Revolution, nobles were forcibly shaved before execution. The guillotine required clean necklines. Some rebel women cut their hair as protest, forming secret societies that embraced short styles and egalitarian flair. Others wore red ribbons around their necks in remembrance of the blade. Outside the court, practical hairstyles reigned. Working-class women tied back their hair in kerchiefs or caps. Men kept hair short for hygiene. But even here, fashion crept in. The queue style, long braid tied with leather, was worn by soldiers and revolutionaries alike. Naval officers oiled and powdered their queues before battle. Hair always remained tied to identity. Wig culture began to wane by the early 1800s. The French Revolution made ostentation dangerous. The Enlightenment ushered in ideals of simplicity and rationality. And in England, the hair powder tax of 1795 made wig upkeep costly. Many dropped the practice overnight. Romantic poets opted for natural curls. The age of the wig was powdered out, but its legacy lingered. Judges and barristers kept the look. Opera singers adopted wig styles for character roles. Costume balls revived poofs and curls, and 20th century cinema brought powdered grandeur to silver screens, complete with pomp, pageantry, and perfectly placed powder. Let's end in Paris, on the eve of revolution. The streets hum with tension. Inside a candlelit salon, a wig-maker adjusts the curls of a duchess, whispering news of unrest. Her mirror reflects not just her face, but her future. Nearby, a young servant slips on a ribbon, copying the style in miniature. Outside, a crowd gathers. Change is in the air, but for now the powder still floats, the curls still shine, because in this moment, on this night, hair is still power, still theatre, still everything. And now, dear listener, Our journey through the ages draws to a close, not with a final snip, but a gentle smoothing of stray strands. From the glint of obsidian in a Mesoamerican temple to the powdered splendour of a Versailles salon, we've travelled continents and centuries together, following the quiet thread of hair and how we've chosen to shape it. Close your eyes for a moment. Can you still see the monk's tonsure under candlelight? The gleam of Viking braids at the edge of a fjord? The humming chant of a child's first haircut by a sacred river? Hair was never just hair. It was a language, a badge, a burden, a bond. It marked the turning points, births, deaths, battles, marriages, and framed the faces of gods, kings, and everyday souls alike. We saw tools evolve from chipped flint to bronze razors, from heated rods to scented powders. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the human desire to shape ourselves, to show who we are and what we believe, even if that meant sitting very still while someone wielded a blade near our ears. And now, in the hush of night, with lights dimmed and stories told, we return to our own time. Perhaps tomorrow you'll brush your hair a bit more thoughtfully, or smile at the quiet ritual of a barber's scissors, or simply remember that every style, no matter how wild or refined, is part of a long, unbroken story, one that began with firelight and flint. So let your breath slow, let your thoughts settle like a comb through soft hair. You've travelled far tonight.